I did research on racial socialization of children and whether or not racial socialization was beneficial to eliminate racism in our society and the problems caused by racism. So, racial socialization is the passing down of cultural beliefs, norms, and language to the future generations. So, in an 1896 case of Plessy versus Ferguson, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall Harlan called for a colorblind society, which means that we make no distinctions between people based on race. So essentially, we become blind to the color of people's skin. So I was interested in whether or not this colorblind approach is better than actually racially socializing children. And the reason why I specifically singled out parents is because, according to research done by Sismata, Kenyatta, and Halgunseth, children start to develop racial awareness in early preschool. So, therefore, the parent's role is very important because obviously parents may have the most influence on us, and thus, since we develop this awareness so early, it's obviously very important that parents practice what is appropriate. So the first aspect I researched was mental health. So research by Dotterer, Mchale, and Crouter in 2009. Research by Hughes and Chen in 1997 found that educating children about their race prepares them for prejudices in the world, which is backed by research by Dotterer, Mchale, and Crouter in 2009, which found that parents practicing racial socialization with their children increased their resilience to and their ability to cope with racial discrimination. So this makes sense because the better we are prepared for something, the less negatively it's going to affect us. Whereas if we are caught off guard, we are not going to be able to cope with the consequences as well. So, racist events affect, also research by Dotterer, Mchale, and Crouter found that racist events affect the mental health more so of those who are not exposed to racial socialization. So again, this means that if you are not taught about racial socialization, discrimination that occurs around you is going to catch you more off guard and affect you more because this is the first year being exposed to it. And then again, Hughes and Chen found that mothers who taught their children about race allowed their children to have more identification with their race. So they had more group cohesion with their race. So they had more confidence because they had a sense of belonging. And it increased their degree of social identity with their race. So again, they felt like they belonged more. So if you are racially discriminated, or if you are discriminated against, but you have a sense of belonging to that race, you are not going to feel as bad about it because you still have positive feelings towards that racial group. You don't just view it as a reason to be discriminated against. You have knowledge of all these awesome things about your race, like your culture, again, your norms, your language. You feel a sense of belonging towards it. The second aspect that I researched was how whether or not we racially socialize our children or not affects their education. This is somewhat linked to mental health, but not 100%. So again, research by Dotterer, Mchale, and Crouter in 2006 found that racial socialization tends to increase academic achievement. Which again, the more that someone identifies with their ethnic group, the lower effect the discrimination is going to have on them. So the less that discrimination affects you, the less it's going to be a distraction, and the more children are going to be able to still focus on their grades and their academics. Whereas if discrimination really affects a child, they're going to spend more time worried about it than focusing on their grades. However, this correlation is kind of not researched well enough because There's also research I found by Caughy, Nettles, and Lima in 2010 that found mixed results on this correlation. However, another thing that I found was that that higher income families tend to practice racial socialization more so than lower income families. So rather than being a correlation between whether or not they were racially socialized and their grades, it could be a correlation between their income and grades. So the more money a family has, the higher their grades could be. That could be the actual correlation. So there should be more research should be done there. And obviously the third aspect I researched was whether or not this colorblind approach actually eliminated racism better than racially socializing did. So research by Pahlke, Bigler, and Suizzo in 2012 found that European Americans tended to support this colorblind tactic more so than families of color, so they tended to practice this more because they believed it would work. However, their research found that actually the opposite happened, where when we practice this colorblind approach, especially in these European children, they tended to have more racist views than those who are racially socialized. So this makes sense because we can't trust all institutions to practice the same approach that the parents do. And so in order to eliminate, parents are the people that influence us most. So even if they don't talk to you about race, if they have racist views and they don't, even if they're minor ones, if they show any different, if they treat those of color any differently, that child is going to pick up on that and they're going to develop those racist views in their head. And also, again, institutions like the media, their fellow classmates, even their teachers might not practice the same approach. Thus, these children will develop their views on race from people other than their parents, which could we can't trust other people necessarily to teach our children that everybody's equal, as well as maybe the parents could. So again, in order to avoid their ethocentric views, we should teach them about race in order to prevent them from having any culture shocks. So if a child is not exposed to other races, when they do become exposed to them, they will view them as not normal and thus develop ethocentric views. And then another point I added after I turned in my outline was the idea of whether or not this colorblind approach will keep our diversity. That's what actually the critics argued against this colorblind approach, was that it would encourage people to forget their heritage, which is something that makes the United States very unique, and I think it's very important that we keep it. So this multiculturalism would be is the retention of cultures rather than having us assimilate, which I think is something that is very desirable in the U.S. and makes us unique. We're like a melting pot of all these cultures. We'd like to keep it that way. So in conclusion, from my research, I found that still practicing racial socialization is much better than practicing this colorblind approach, because not only does this colorblind approach negatively affect the mental health of the child and the education possibly, but it also doesn't even work at eliminating racism, and it would eliminate our diversity in the United States, which is a very unique aspect towards us that we should try to keep.